If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. I'm Kathryn Hansen, and I'm really happy to be back for the first episode of 2024. This episode is going to be a little different than my other episodes. I'm actually trying to just come on the show and talk without any sort of script, and I just have a few notes in front of me, and I have a personal story to share, and then I'm going to tie that into recovery from binging, and I hope that you'll get something out of it. This idea came about as part of looking at what improvements I may want to make in 2024. And in doing that, I dove into some of my reviews for the podcast, and that's always fun and interesting. And I love all the reviews that people have left, and I truly appreciate people who have taken time to say what a difference the podcast has made in their life. And I also appreciate people who gave me honest feedback about where it's not really helping them or areas that I could improve. One of the reviews that really stood out to me said that I sound like a robot. So after laughing a bit, I realized that there is an element of truth to that, especially in the earlier episodes. I mean, when I first started this, I was so incredibly nervous. It felt like such a vulnerable thing, and I definitely scripted every word and read every word. And over time, although I still script the podcast, at least when I've done my solo episodes, I do feel like it's gotten more natural for me, even though it is still a challenge. And I'll talk more about that as I go here, but this particular review went on to say that my guests sounded normal, but I sounded like I was trying to be too perfect or say things exactly right. And yeah, I mean, for sure, there's an element of that. I mean, I always want to feel like I'm being clear and I'm hitting all the points I want to hit and I'm not forgetting everything. But when I do go back and listen to maybe those first 20 episodes, I'm like, just talk a little more normally. So that is one of my goals this year, is to come on the show with some notes and some ideas I want to talk about and talk to you in a more conversational way. And one of my other goals is to start some YouTube videos as well, where I do the same thing and really hit on a topic and share with you and just give you ideas and insights and tips you can use in a way that feels like we're just having a conversation. So I'm actually finding this to be pretty difficult so far. And the first way that I'll relate that back to eating is that when we do look at changes we want to make, whether that's stopping binging or reducing overeating or just making some general improvements in our eating habits, it can feel uncomfortable at first. You can feel a bit like a fish out of water. I mean, we definitely get used to our routine. There's some comfort in that. I know that when I'm reading my script for my podcast, there's definitely comfort. And right now, I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to say next. But just know that that's normal. And as you approach a meal where you're trying to make change, just know that your brain is going to call for what's familiar. It's going to tempt you just to seek the comfort of what you've always done. And I would challenge you just to stay the course. And even if you fumble through the first meals, and even if I fumble through this podcast, you absolutely can keep going and keep making the changes that you want to make. And we all have a story about how we got here as far as developing maybe some bad habits or ways that we stay stuck. And I'm going to explain how I arrived at being, very uncomfortable with public speaking. And I know it's something that a lot of people are uncomfortable with, so I know my story isn't necessarily a unique one, but again, I'm very, very introverted, have been since I was a very small child. I mean, I avoided speaking to people to the extreme, to the point of when I would go to a restaurant, my parents couldn't get me to say what I wanted and they had to order for me. And, it did become a crutch in a lot of ways. And of course, as I grew up, there were times that I had to talk to people that I didn't know or groups of people. And I remember in school, I always dreaded the first day when the teacher went around the room and told you to introduce yourself and tell the class something about yourself. I just dreaded the teacher getting to me and having to speak. But as I got older, there were more and more times that I simply had to do things like that. I had to talk in front of people that I didn't know or bigger groups of people. And there was a lot of anxiety, and it never really went away. It was just something I learned to deal with. It was something that I just knew felt like a part of who I was, and I just kind of managed the best I can. But I was always more comfortable with very small groups of people or close friends or one or two close friends. That was always my comfort zone as far as speaking. And in that situation, I'm very comfortable with talking and sharing and being vulnerable. And then there was this message that my father imparted on me. And it's not a wrong message. Like, Dad, if you're listening, I know you meant well, but he would tell me that if you don't talk to people, if you're not friendly and outgoing, they're going to think you're not nice. So then there was even more anxiety, like, oh my gosh, I have to show these people that I'm nice and I can't make them think I'm rude. So then I would try to talk, and it just became this weird spiral. So the point here is just to share my story with this challenge. And then I got into my teen years, and those of you who have read my book know that I went down the path of dieting, which then led to binge eating, which became a terrible habit that continued through my early to mid 20s. And during this time, my social anxiety really got linked to the binging. And a lot of that was because of messages I learned in therapy saying that you binge to cope with anxiety in your life. And one of my biggest forms of anxiety was the social anxiety. So, like, for example, I took a speech class in college and I really dreaded this, and it was a requirement. And whereas when I had to talk in class as a child, yeah, I felt the anxiety. Yeah, I didn't like it. I just fumbled through it and did the best I could. But when it came to college and this speech class, it wasn't just that I had the anxiety, it's that I had the anxiety, and then that triggered urges to binge, and then I binged, and then in therapy I learned that I was binging to cope with the anxiety, and this really perpetuated the cycle of binging and really linked it to those uncomfortable feelings, so that I would binge prior to having to make a speech the next day, and then I would binge after the speech, and I told myself it was a way I was trying to escape the uncomfortable feelings, and I told myself it was a way I was trying to numb the uncomfortable feelings before going into the speech. And thinking about it this way just was not helpful. It was not productive. Again, those of you who have read my book know that I really took a different approach and separated the binging from the other problems in my life. And just to back up a little bit, when I binged before or after the speech, it did nothing to help that anxiety. Even though I told myself it was doing things and I tried to find symbolic meaning in it, it actually didn't quell any of my fears about going into class the next day and giving that speech, or it didn't make me feel any better about myself after the speech, because instead of giving myself any sort of praise for getting through it and doing something challenging, I just harmed myself with eating massive amounts of food and then feeling even worse about myself, both for the speech that I gave and for the eating afterward. And then when I stopped binging, when I corrected that habit in my brain and unlinked it from all of the other emotions and stress and problems in my life, then I kind of went back to how I was as a child. I still had the social anxiety. I still didn't like talking in front of people, but that didn't lead to any harmful behaviors before or after. It just led to those uncomfortable feelings. And that's so much better than dealing with those uncomfortable feelings and the horrible pain and shame of binging. But once the binging stopped, I was working in an environment where I really didn't have to talk too much to adults or in front of groups. I was working in a school at the time, and even talking to the kids sometimes brought up these feelings of social anxiety. And at the time, my goal was also to share my story of recovering from binging and really helping people see that it doesn't have to be so complicated and they are capable of extinguishing this habit in their brain. And the good thing was that I always excelled at writing. Writing, I felt like, was one of my strengths. It was something that came easier for me. It was something that was more comfortable for me, and not necessarily easier. I mean, I do find writing to be a challenge. I do find it to be time consuming. I'm not really the fastest writer, but it's something that I felt like was one of my strengths. So sharing my story in Brain Over Binge and writing that book felt natural for me. It felt like something that felt true to who I was, and also helped me kind of avoid the discomfort of maybe sharing my story with spoken words. And as I published Brain Over Binge, it got to be more well-known. People started to find it. People started to reach out to me. And there was more requests and there was more motivation then to start speaking more about what I had been through and what I had learned. So I continued to maintain a blog for a really long time until I finally decided to do the podcast. And like I said in the beginning, at first it was scripting every word and being very deliberate and managing those anxious feelings and just doing the best I could. And I go back and I do listen to the episodes with some self-criticism, but also some self-compassion. Like, this was really hard for her and she did it. And it's okay if she sounds like a robot. It's also okay if someone else doesn't like that I sound like a robot. And now that I've laid all that out there, I do want to bring it back to eating, and hopefully some of the lessons I learned in this journey with the podcast can help you as you learn to live your life and eat without binging. A huge lesson that I want you to take away is that we all have our strengths and weaknesses. And this applies to food as well. And if you're listening to this podcast, my guess is that you do have some quote unquote weaknesses around food. And I hesitate using that word because I don't think it has to be viewed in a negative light. I think it can just be seen as a challenge and as something that may not come as easily for you as, let's say, the person sitting next to you at a restaurant that seems to just eat without any problem and puts their fork down when they're full. It's okay if you're not like that right now. It's okay if you've never been like that. We're simply all unique, and I'm sure you have so many amazing strengths and amazing qualities that you use for good in your life, and eating just happens to be a challenge for you. Some of that could have to do with the food environment that you grew up in, the habits that you learned from people around you, or simply your inborn traits and your unique physiological makeup. But that doesn't mean that you have to just give up and say, well, this is too hard for me. I'm just going to either restrict or I'm just going to binge. Like, it's about helping yourself to learn skills, even though it may be difficult for you. It's about maybe having a meal plan at first to help yourself have a structure. I mean, I relate that back to me having scripts in the beginning of my podcast and even throughout the podcast. I just felt like that was a structure that helped me overcome a challenge that I had. And for you, having that structure of maybe 3 meals a day and a few snacks could really help you put some boundaries around your eating and give you some comfort as you find the way of eating that works for you. And then you can eventually let go of that meal plan in the future if that's what you want. It might take more practice for you to learn how to eat certain foods in moderation when, again, the person next to you could seem to have no problem eating a few cookies and not going back for more. And that's okay. I think that's the biggest thing that people do is think, well, what's wrong with me? Something must be deeply broken about me because I have a challenge with this. Well, no, the person next to you probably has challenges in other parts of their life and other things are more difficult for them. So I think it's really helpful to accept this challenge and don't view it as a burden, but view it more as an opportunity for you to learn and grow and learn things about yourself and learn the ways of eating that fit best in your life. Another correlation I made is that I don't think I'll ever feel truly comfortable with the public speaking aspect of what I do. And you may feel that same way about certain foods. Like there may be certain foods that you never truly feel comfortable with that always lead to heightened cravings or that always make you feel some sort of shame or guilt. And that doesn't mean you have to avoid them. That just means you have to know that if you choose to have these foods, if you want them in your life, you have to accept the challenge that comes with it, that your unique body and brain is presenting. Just like if I want to continue sharing my message, I have to accept that there is going to be some anxiety that I have to overcome. And there's also nothing wrong with deciding, hey, this food just doesn't work for me and it's not something I want to have in my life. Just like I could decide, hey, I'm just going to stick to writing and let's forget this speaking thing. So it's really up to you. I mean, you get to decide. Another insight I had around this relates back to what I said before about binging in response to these emotional problems and this social anxiety, and then stopping binging and still having that social anxiety and the issues with public speaking, but not binging, and realizing that you can still have those problems without responding in a way that harms yourself. If right now you struggle with binging and you feel like it is deeply connected to some of the things going on in your life and some of the negative emotions that you feel, I understand how strong that connection can be. And it may not be easy to break it, but I want you to try to look back and see, before your binging habit started, were there times that you had these problems and these emotions and you did not respond with binging? And if you can see that at some point in the past that you did that and binging just wasn't a thing for you in those moments of feeling that way, then you can see how it could be a possibility in the future to have those same issues and to not feel so compelled to binge in those moments. Really try to start to see that the link you have between binging and emotions and life's problems is a temporary one. And it's a temporary one that can be broken without needing to revamp your whole life or solve some of these problems that may seem really hard to solve or deeply ingrained in who you are. I hope you've gotten something out of this. I hope you've enjoyed this unscripted episode. And if you did or if you didn't, please feel free to let me know or leave a review on your podcast platform of choice. I look forward to bringing you so much great content in 2024. I have some great guests planned. Coach Julie will, of course, be joining me again soon. And if you don't yet follow me on YouTube, I encourage you to do that because I do plan on releasing videos in the very near future. I'll include a link to my YouTube channel in the show description, and there's already a lot there. My entire podcast is on YouTube, and there's a lot of podcast clips and different interviews that I've done. Also in the show description, you'll find all of the Brain Over Binge resources that you can use if you need extra support and extra help as you overcome your own food challenges. We offer one-on-one coaching, and I'm actually doing one-on-one coaching as well now, which I'm loving, and Coach Julie still has her amazing one-on-one sessions available too. You can also join the Brain Over Binge group for daily support. Coach Julie does an amazing job every day of being there for people and motivating them and helping them see a way out of this. Because she's been there, she overcame 40 years of this and just really understands each group member and helps them as they let go of binging and as they find their own unique formula for eating. She also has weekly group coaching calls every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for 1 hour. And these are so highly interactive and highly supportive, and she teaches lessons on a variety of recovery topics. And we also have an exciting announcement about the Brain Over Binge group for 2024. I'm going to be doing monthly Q&A calls with the group. And I'm really looking forward to this and just addressing any questions that you have and anything that you might want my unique opinion on or advice. My monthly calls will be on the third Thursday of each month from 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, also for 1 hour. So the first one will be on January 18th. If you're listening at the time this is released, that's pretty soon. So if you want to learn more about the Brain Over Binge group and join us, you can do that at brainoverbinge.com/group. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you'll join me again next time. And this part is still scripted, but I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.